Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I do love talking about making Python web apps. I actually just taught a 2-hour workshop about making Python web apps. And yeah, really excited to show how to be very productive making Python web apps in VS Code. So I am mostly going to be trying to do demo, like as much demo as possible, since we are talking about VS Code today. This is the repo I'm going to be using. It is a Django app that I'm going to be demoing with today. But many of the things we're looking at should be similar across Flask, FastAPI, Quartz, Sonic, whatever you're using. Also, let us know in the chat what you're using. Are you a Django developer, a Flask developer, or are you, new to Python and hoping to get into web apps? Drop that in the chat. So if you do want to try to follow along or use this afterwards, here is the repo we're going to be using. I'm going to be opening up in Codespaces. If you've been watching all today, you have heard of Codespaces already. It is my favorite thing to use because I love to do everything in the browser, right? I'm a web developer. I like to make websites. I also like to make my websites on a website. So I love the fact that I can use Codespaces in a browser. I would happily just get rid of everything on my machine that wasn't a browser. So that's what I'm going to be using today. So I've already got it open in a code space here. And I've got this pretty well configured. So I do want to show that I have created a dev container definition. So code spaces, if you don't have a dev container definition, it'll try to do the right thing and see that you're running Python and make a Python container. But I always like to have an explicit definition so that everything is set up so that it works really well for whatever I'm working on. So here in my dev container folder, I've got 3 files: devcontainer.json, dockercompose.yaml, and dockerfile. So we could start with devcontainer.json to see what I've got set up here. So you can see that it is using a Docker Compose file. The reason I'm using Docker Compose today is because I actually have a Postgres server running inside this code space. And to me, this is just so cool, the fact that we can do this. Because I hate setting up Postgres locally, but I can run it inside this server, inside this code space. You can actually see it in my ports tab. You can see the Postgres port here. So it is running 5432. That's the standard Postgres port. And this is all possible because of how I've used this Docker Compose.yaml. So we could take a look at that. And in this Docker Compose, we've got the app, and that's my Python 3.11 Django app. But then we also have the DB service, and this is using the latest Postgres image, and it's got some environment variables here to set up the username and password, and these are all just local, not for production. But that's how we're able to actually have a server running inside our dev container. I also have my Docker file that's pulling in a Python 3 image. And it's also setting up a couple other things that I like. So it is setting up the Postgres client's PSQL, and it is also setting up AZD, which is what I like to use to deploy. So if we go back to devcontainer.json, we see a few more customizations, and we'll see that I use these throughout. So one thing I have is SQL Tools connections. This is the extension I'm going to be using, is SQL Tools. Really great extension. I saw somebody in the chat earlier mention that they like it too. Love this extension, and we're going to use it a bunch. And it's got all the information it needs in order to connect to that local database from the Docker Compose. And then I've got some other things enabled for how I'm going to do testing, how I want to do formatting using Black. I'm also going to be doing linting with Rough. And then I've got the extensions I want it to load in. So I'm going to use these extensions throughout today. And then finally, we have the post create command. So this is what it's going to run after it's set up the whole container. It's got the Postgres running and the app service set up. It's got that all set up. And then finally, it runs this command here. And so this is going to install all my requirements that I need for developing, and then also install my pre-commit hooks, because I like to use pre-commit. And there you go. So I'm inside a dev container. I've got a Postgres server running. So how do I actually, develop this web app here? Well, the first thing we need is to actually set up the database, right? So we have the database, and we can let's look at SQL Tools here. And SQL Tools is going to show us the, connections based off of that, what I had in devcontainer.json. So I can go ahead and look through here and look at the tables, and I see there are no tables yet. And that's because we haven't added any tables to our database yet. So it just starts off as an empty database. That's the very first thing I'm going to do is add tables. Now in Django, the way to add tables is to use the migrate command. If you're in Flask, there's also, if you're using like Alembic or SQL Alchemy, you could use a similar migrate command. So what I have is in my VS Code, my .viz code folder. This is where you can put additional customizations for VS Code. So I have a task.json file. This defines a bunch of tasks that are useful for me inside this app. So this is a great place to put Django specific or Flask specific tasks. It's very commonly used also for JavaScript for NPM and stuff like that. So you can see one of my tasks, the very first one, is to run the migrate command. So that's what I want to do. There's a couple ways we can run tasks. One thing is I can do bring up the command palette, Command-Shift-P, and then search for run task. And then I'm going to task run task. And then I can see all my tasks here. And I'm going to select the first one, apply migrations. And you can see that it opens up this terminal here. And I see there's an error. It actually can't find this secret key environment variable. That's because I didn't read the README. And the README says the first thing I need to do is actually create a .m file, because that's the best practice for how to store environment variables. And we never check that into source control. So I'm going to make this .m file. And I'm just going to copy in the recommended things for local development. Okay. So this has my environment variables. So this is the variables I need for connecting to the database. And we're going to pass all these environment variables off to Django. So connects to the database. This puts Django in debug mode. This is a secret key just for local use, not for production. And this is a few other Django settings. And these are referenced in the Django settings file here. Settings.py loads in the .m file. All right, so now Django should hopefully know where to find the database and where to get the secret key. So I'm going to try running that command, that task again. So I'll go to task run task and run it again. And here you see, so it's run the migrations, and you see it's actually applied quite a few migrations. So that means it's created quite a few tables. And that's because Django is a very opinionated framework. So it comes with all these tables to get, at the beginning. So we've got admin and auth. And then it also has the ones that I've made for quizzes, because this is a quiz app we're making. Now I can go back to SQL Tools and look at that. All of the tables are here. Really cool. So I can click on a particular table, and then I can click on that again and actually explore the table, and I can see the column attributes. Now there's no rows in this table yet. All we've done so far is create the tables. There's no data in this database yet. So we could actually run the app right now, and we'd see there'd just be no data. We could do that. Let's run the app right now and see what it looks like with no data. So it's not that exciting, but we'll try it out. So I'm going to run the app. All right. And so here you can see it pops up that it actually gives me a notification. And so it says, it's your application running on port 8000 is available. So I can open that in the browser, and it opens at this funky code space URL. So it's not going to open up at localhost 8000 because we're not really running locally. It runs up at this, goes at this funky code space URL. And we could also find this in the ports listing here. So you can see all the ports that have been exposed from this code space, and you can click on them from here too. Okay, so what we can see is that there are no quizzes yet. All right, well, I want there to be quizzes. So I'm going to actually load in some seed data using another task. So I'm going to stop the server for now and then go to my tasks. And I'm going to show you another way to run tasks that I really like. So it's using another extension called Task Explorer, and it will load all the tasks from your task.json. So I'm going to load it here and click on load seed data. And this is using a Django command in order to load the data in. But once again, all these tasks are from task.json. So whatever task you need for your app, whatever kind of app it is, you can put that in a task.json file, and then you can get to it from either the command palette or using an extension like Task Explorer. Okay, so it said that it loaded the seed data. So I can close this. And then let's go ahead and run this app again. Now, I want to show how I'm actually running this app. So I'm using run and debug over here. And the reason I'm using this is because I want to be able to actually debug the app. I want the full VS Code debugging breakpoint experience, because I don't want to do print debugging. I've done enough print debugging in my life. I want to use breakpoints now. So I'm using launch.json. That's what you want to add if you want to be able to use run and debug. And it actually, if you just open any Django or Flask repo, it'll auto suggest that there's a Django launch.json or Flask launch.json. So I just took the suggested one from VS Code, and this is what it looks like. So it runs manage.py, because that's in every Django app. It runs the run server command inside that. It says Django true. So Python VS Code actually knows that Django is different from Flask and can offer a slightly different run and debug experience. And then there's also just my code true. So this is if you only want to, when you're breakpoint debugging, if you only want to get into your own code and you don't want to dig into like Django code. I sometimes do dig into Django code because I think that's fun to really get in there. But when you are debugging your own app, typically you just want to, go into your own code. So that's what I'm using whenever I want to run the server. I'm doing it via launch.json. So let's go ahead and run it again. And that's using this command here. And now it's open again. So I'm opening in browser, and this time we see that it has our default data. So this is a Python trivia quiz. So let's get some answers in the chat here. Who invented Python? Let's see how real-time the chat is. Do you have it open on the side here? So was it Guido, Ada, Rob, or Kathleen? I don't know if I can get the answers real time enough. All right, I'm going to reveal it as Guido. And Guido actually works for Microsoft. So you'll sometimes see him at Microsoft events. So it says, yes, we got it. Cool. Oh, now I see all the answers. I think there might be a delay between the chat and getting to see them. So the next question is, when was the first version of Python released? So we have 1971, 1981, 91, 2001, 2011. How old is Python? Does anyone know how old it is? You think back to, if you've been programming Python for a while, when's the earliest time you programmed it? Was it elementary school, middle school, high school, college? Were you just a baby? At this one, I always get a little bit off. Okay, so we have a vote for 1981. So I'll go with that vote and see. The correct answer is 1991. So it's pretty old, but not that old. So what is that, like 30, like almost 30 years now? All right, next question. What is the latest version of Python released? As in, like, what's the latest stable version of Python released? If you went to downloads.python.org right now and you wanted to download, the latest version listed there, what version would you see? And of course, you could cheat and you could go to downloads.python.org, but this is really just a trick to try and get you to download the latest Python, because the latest Python is really great. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so we have a vote for 3.9, 3.11, 3.11. All right, let's go for 3.11. That's right. So 3.11 is the latest version of Python, and it is really awesome. It's got a lot of speed improvements, so I highly recommend downloading that if you don't have it already. Okay, so that's our app. That's our quiz. Cool. So it is working. Great. The next thing I want to do is actually add a feature to this app, right? So you see, we've got questions. We can have, multiple choice answers to them. We can actually have free text answers as well. But I want to be able to add a new feature to this app. So what I want to add is a new kind of answer. And so to do that, the first thing is to add something to models.py. So I'm going to go inside models.py. And here you can see that we've got the question model, the quiz model, the answer model, the free text answer, and multiple choice answer. So these are all models in our database. If we go back to SQL Tools, let's go back to SQL Tools briefly again and take a look at the data here. So we can see that these models all correspond to tables in our database. So we could look and we could see all the multiple choice answers, and you can actually see, the list of the choices for these and then the actual correct answer, right? So you can look at the database to find out the answers too. So what we want to do is add a new type of answer, and I want to be able to make true, false questions. So just be able to say blah, 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 and then have the user say true or false. All right, so to do that, I'm going to say true, false, answer, and I'm going to inherit from answer. And you see, I've got Copilot enabled. And a lot of times I do use Copilot suggestions. In this case, I'm not going to, because I have a particular way I want to make this model. So I want to use a car field and just have it be true or false. So I'm going to do max length of 5. And then the choices, and there I did take Copilot suggestions. So these are going to be the choices. It's either true or false. Okay. So that's my true false answer. I also need to modify up here this convenience method we have. So I'm going to self-attribute and true false answer. Okay, looks good. And then when I saved it auto formatted, because I do have black auto formatting. So I do recommend using black and auto formatting in your Python code, because it'll just fix everything up as you're typing, which is what it just did for me. Okay, so now I've added the model. Then I'm going to run a task again. So I'm going to go ahead and run, this time I need to make migrations because I've just added a model. I need to tell Django there is something new. So I'm going to run the make migrations task, and it sees that there's a new model and it says, okay, there's a new migration. And then I run the apply migrations task, and it's going to go ahead and apply that new migration. So now if we go ahead and go back to SQL Tools and take a look at SQL Tools, and we might need to do a refresh. This refresh. Here we go. To try and just get it to show us that there should now be a true false. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Where do we have refresh? Refresh, refresh, refresh. Ooh, I'm just going to collapse, expand, and here we go. It should show up. My icons aren't showing up right now, so it's hard to do anything without the icons. But it's in our database now. So that's cool. But we need to also add it to our Django admin. So if you've done Django before, you know that Django comes built in with an admin interface. So let me go ahead and run that server again. And then for the admin interface, boop, boop, boop. All right, we do need a username and password. So I'm going to use another task to make my super user. All right, so it just wants a username and an email. It's kind of my email, and then a password, and then a password. Password's too short. Oh well, I'm local. I'll use a good one on production, I swear. So now I should be able to log in. And here we see the Django admin interface. And so now I could go ahead and add a new question. And in the new question, I see I could have a question that has a free text answer and a multiple choice answer, but I don't see true false yet. That's because I need to modify the admin as well. So I'm going to go ahead into admin and add on the stuff here. And I'm just going to use Copilot to do just to add it for me. And we need a little import up here. So the thing about Copilot is that the more code you write, the better it is at knowing what you want to do. So, now it pretty much knows what I want to do. So I can go, and now that is imported. So that should all be good. Oh, and I've still got the server running. So we've got it in admin here. Got it here. All right, so let's go ahead and try that again. And now, okay, so now that's running fine. I'm just going to reload. All right, so we can go ahead and add a question. So we'll just say Python is the best, and correct answer true. We'll save that. And there we go. Now we have a new question in our quiz, and we could look at that in SQL tools as well. So that's pretty cool. I also want to test this stuff. So I want to show testing. So I have a test.py here, and I can use the testing tab. So VS Code has a testing tab, and VS Code for Python, it can do automatic test discovery of unit test or PyTest. Those are the two most popular frameworks. It actually doesn't do automatic discovery of Django unit tests, but what you can do is if you're doing Django, you can just use PyTest with the PyTest Django package, and then it'll work. So we can actually see here that it's found all my tests here, and I can tell it to run all these tests. All right, so now it's running the test, and it says, boom, they all passed. They're all green. That's awesome. This is pretty much the same as me running locally Python, Python-admin PyTest or just PyTest. And you can see the same test pass. Here you can also see my coverage statistics as well. But they're both using PyTest in order to run these tests here. Now I want to add a new test because I added new code, right? And ideally, I'd always just have 100% code coverage. And every time I add new code, especially if I'm adding it with Copilot, I want to have a test to make sure that it's good. So I'm going to go inside here and say I'm making a true/false answer model test. Okay, and we got some recommendations here. So it did a test with a correct answer of true. I'm going to add another one for a true/false answer of false. And let's see if it just auto completes that. Okay, great. And we still need to import, so I'll import up here. All right, very good. And now let's go ahead and run the tests again. And now we can see they all test. Great. So really important whenever we're adding code, especially if it came from Copilot or from Stack Overflow or something like that, always want to be adding as many tests as possible. And unit tests are a great way to do that. The other thing I could do is I could look at the source control tab and look at things I've changed and think to myself like, oh, is there some additional test I need here? You can also look at coverage and see what you're missing. All right, the next thing I want to show is debugging. All right, so using that run and debug, because I said like the reason that I'm using this run and debug is because I want to, to actually be able to use breakpoint debugging. So let's try that out. So if we go into our views.py, okay, And what we could do is we could set a breakpoint. So we could set a breakpoint on here. This is display question. And I've just clicked it in order to set a breakpoint. And so now I'm going to go into run and debug mode. All right. And then go back to the main page with the quizzes. So Python trivia, okay. And you can actually see in the, in the browser there, it's stopped. So it's stopped on here. And in here, we can see the question ID and the quiz ID that came in via the URL, and then the request object. And then we can go through this and actually look and see the values of everything. So this is a really nice way of developing and being able to really see what your code is doing, so that you don't have to be using print statements all the time, right? We want to be able to get away from that because we can do much better debugging when we're able to fully use tools like this. So that's really cool. I also want to show what happens if there is a bug in your code, an existing bug. So there actually isn't a bug in my code. I'm going to introduce a bug in my code. Watch this, okay? So let's say, like right now I have this next question functionality. Maybe I want to have a previous question functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and say prev question equals, started off as equaling none. And then inside this for loop, I'm going to set prev question equal to questions int. All right. And then I'm going to return prev question to the template, so the template can use it. Otherwise, it's just dead code, which is what Pylance was telling me. And then I can go into my template and just display the previous question. Oop, previous question, prev. Okay. All right, so let's try this out. And you might already spot the bug with this logic if you've read my code very quickly. But I'm going to reload the page, and I don't currently have any breakpoint set. But let's reload the page and see what happens. Okay. That one actually worked because I wrote this correctly. Or no, I actually set it equal to the current question. I'm going to do questions in -1. All right, because it should be the previous question. So let's try that. Okay, so we get that a server error occurred. All right, but what I want is actually get it to use the Vizcode debugging. And let me see if I've got it set up for that. So we should be. So I've got debug is true, and then I have debug propagate exceptions should also be true. And that should get it to use the Vizcode debugger to break on exceptions. It didn't do it that time. Let me see if I can get it. Let me just check more things here and see if I can get it to use the Vizcode debugger. Maybe it's not going to do it this time. It's so cool when it works. We'll try it once more time. Otherwise, I'll just do a breakpoint. So it's reload. There we go. Oh, this is so cool. Not sure why it didn't work for it, but it's actually broken at the the line that caused the error. So typically you'd get like this stack trace in the web page, but it's so much nicer to actually break in the code itself because we now have all these local variables. So this is just really cool. Okay, so we are at time now. So you are welcome to look through this repo, use your own. I've got slides that recap everything here. So if you missed anything, go through these slides here. You can get the code. You can get more example repos. You can hit me up on social media, Mastodon, Twitter, GitHub, wherever, and let me know any questions you have, and let me know if you have any tips too, because I'm always learning as well.
Thank you so much. We got a chance to talk about this a little bit before, but these are new changes to this new presentation. I learned so much. I appreciate it again, Pamela. And we had a ton of questions in the chat, and we can only have time for one quick question, which is a style question. So Step in the chat wants to know what What a lovely VS Code color scheme. So very kind, starting with some compliments. How did you get it and what's the name? And then Ronan in the chat wants to know what font you're using. So maybe those questions will come in together.
All right. Apparently, the most important part of being a Python developer is doing it with style, which is why I've got my glitter today. But yeah, this theme is Solarized Light, and it comes with VS Code. I'm not super fancy, so I don't install extra themes. My colleague Jay is a big fan of the Studio Ghibli themes. If any of you are, Totoro or Ponyo watchers, those themes look really beautiful. Yeah, it's just a Solarized Light theme, and I don't know, it's just whatever font comes with it.
Well, I'll have you on the Python Pulse again. We'll get some more of these questions that were in the chat answered. And I guess next we're going to jump into our next conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pamela. Love hearing the style too. True Pythonista.